All right, it's 2 past. I want to be respectful of everyone's time. We appreciate everyone joining today. We're really excited to be here.
Yeah.
This session is really designed for CEOs and co-founders of climate tech startups. Though I think I've seen some communications folks joining as well. So I think this will be a very, good session for all. But generally speaking, we really want to for everyone joining, help you better understand how PR and communications can support your company's mission and its growth through its journey. Communications can be a really strategic tool to support you wherever you are in that journey, whether you're looking to raise funds, attract talent, or your first customers. PR can be a very, very good tool for that. And we're here to answer any questions that you have through that. So I think there's a Q&A button. Feel free to throw questions in real time. We'll try to address them as we go, but we'll also take some questions at the end as well. But first, I guess we should do some quick introductions.
Yeah.
I'm Melissa Mahoney. I am an executive vice president here at V2, and I lead the climate tech practice. And I'm joined here with my colleague.
Hi, Liam Sullivan here. I'm a climate tech account manager based in New York City, and really looking forward to digging in and sharing some insights today with you all.
Liam, we look a little bit younger there. I think those are pre-COVID photos.
Yes, we haven't had a new headshot in a while.
No, but just quickly about V2, we're a boutique PR agency. We specialize 3 sectors in traditional B2B tech. Climate tech is why we're here today, and also healthcare tech. We are headquartered here in sunny or not so sunny Boston, depending on the day and the season. We are supported by a global network of boutique agencies with similarly minded owner-operated agencies. And I think we distinguish ourselves by being business consultants who happen to specialize in communications, which means that we are we always have senior level involvement in counsel, and we really focus on results that matter. So that was the quick sales pitch, Liam.
Great.
That's it. Well, our climate tech credentials, I think, are probably important to most of you joining the call today. We work with a variety of climate tech businesses, including a climate-focused venture fund called Breakthrough Energy Ventures. We really get to stay focused on the trends and keep a strong, pulse on kind of what's happening across different sectors. We look across climate tech, across manufacturing, transportation, buildings, agriculture, and energy, of course, or electricity more specifically, mostly. And, we support our clients in the space are very varied, everything from long duration energy storage for industrial decarbonization. We work with a company that captures methane on dairy farms. We'll actually use that as a case study. We'll talk about that today. Energy efficient and climate resilient home building. And we also work with renewable energy developers. So a lot of different sectors, which we really enjoy. I think it's a really exciting way for us to learn and grow in the practice. We've been in the space since Clean Tech 1.0, can't say that too fast, and have supported more than, I think we're definitely over 100 funding campaigns at this point, which is a lot, and it's really exciting for us. But transitioning.
Yeah, so the interest in climate tech is clearly why we're all here today, and so really excited to chat more. We know it's a really fun time to be in the space, but it's also difficult to be noticed. As everyone knows, the media really follows the money when it comes to really any trend in any industry. And so as investment in climate tech has increased over the past 4 to 5 years, even, so does the media interest and the media that's covering it. As you can see here on the slide, using one of our media monitoring tools, Muckrack, articles even just mentioning climate tech have soared and spiked over the past 12 months. There's so much content out there. There's so much coverage of the activity that's happening in the space. And so with that, it's really difficult to be noticed. As these news outlets and newsrooms start to build out, they're hiring more staff to cover the activity. And it just means with that scale come new challenges.
Last year has been, one of the most exciting times to work in climate tech. We've certainly felt the excitement and the buzz, and the industry as a whole has really enjoyed the tailwinds of both corporate and consumer interest in climate and solving for climate challenges. The IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, that's certainly given the climate tech ecosystem a really boost of both confidence and certainly money, which is helpful. So it's been a really exciting time. But most of the companies that we work with and that we talk to in climate tech are also feeling the impact of the broader economy, what's happening in kind of the B2B tech space. There's bound to feel like we're being squeezed a little bit. The funding has slowed down. The investment from VCs has definitely slowed down in the last quarter, as reported by many different outlets. So it's hard to reconcile all of the excitement and the boost that you're getting from the IRA with this other kind of thing that's happening out in the economy. So it feels like a kind of a difficult time, but also an exciting time. But that's actually kind of why we're here, right? There's so much going on in the space, so much discussion. So it's increasingly more important to stand out in this noisy market and gain the attention for the VC funds that are seem to be coming into the market a little bit more slowly. So it's more competitive, both at on the funding level as well as the media level. So we think now is the time to invest in PR and communications. It doesn't matter really where you are in the journey. Communications and PR in particular can support you kind of wherever you are, whether you're starting and launching from stealth or you're to the point of revenue generating. Or most likely you're somewhere in between. But PR used effectively can kind of support you wherever you are in that journey. It just means that the business goals that you have and the way you kind of set up your strategic communications program is slightly different depending on where you are in that journey.
Speaking of business goals, we really recognize, and we want to use this as the grounding for the entirety of our presentation today, talking about how the different goals for your business really impact and define what your strategies are going to be from a communications perspective. We know oftentimes these are some of the top goals that a early stage climate tech business might have. But raising capital means you want to demonstrate momentum and your market fit to potential other investors. If you're looking to hire talent, it's really important to communicate that message and your vision as well as your opportunity in the market so that you have the right folks along for the journey as you build your business. And if you're ready to attract those really important early customers, you want to look at those verticals and you want to speak directly to the folks that'll be buying or purchasing your product or your service or using your technology so that you can showcase the potential of what that means for the market more broadly. And the same goes for partners. They're critical for scaling your business. We know how important they are. And so a combination of all of those different methods and techniques and using a really targeted fashion is really critical. And once you understand these business goals, you can then dig in and define and decide how you're going to communicate and map everything back to this.
And when we're engaging with a climate tech startup for the first time, that's really where we start the conversation, is really digging in to understand kind of what are the most important business goals for you in order for us to build the best plan.
Melissa, do you want to take us through a recent example of some work we've done that kind of uses all of that grounding and really strategy to bring a communications plan to life?
Yeah, and I think the first thing is having a communications plan and really starting and thinking through the entire process is really important. I think it's easy to want to jump right in, and you think you have, people start with the point of I have something to announce. It's a news announcement, and that's not really where we want to focus. We want to think holistically about planning, whether you're thinking about planning a short-term campaign around a news announcement or more broadly over a long-term, whether that's a quarter or a year plan. This kind of model fits that. And we want to start with yeah, an example. So we actually, really exciting example. We just launched a company called Windfall Bio less than a month ago. And so we thought this would be a good way to walk you through kind of our thought process and how we go through starting from defining objectives all the way through measuring success. And here for Windfall, well, first, let me tell you what Windfall is. It's actually, the company has built a methane to organic fertilizer solution for basically absorbing methane on dairy farms and turning that into a valuable product, which is fertilizer, which is both valuable to the dairy farms in creating a product that is otherwise costs a lot of money, but it's also addressing methane, which is one of the most potent greenhouse gases, an underappreciated gas. Everybody talks about carbon, but methane is really much more potent and damaging to the climate through warming. So really exciting company, and they came to us to launch the company. They were in stealth. They'd received seed funding. $9 million of seed funding from a couple of very notable investors. Mayfield was the deal lead. They also got support from Breakthrough Energy Ventures, which is a client of ours. And they came to us looking to launch from stealth. One point that I'd like to make, a lot of companies think that when they have the funding, they've got like this window of like 10 days. Once they've closed their funding, they've got they have to
the Form D filing.
Form D. And they've got this window to clock down. And I would tell you, start off like that is not a window that you have to worry about as a climate tech startup. You really have the time to make it your own. And that's what we did here in this case. The funding had closed, I think, at the end of the year or early 2023. But we had a couple of months to really build out the launch plan, which included ensuring launch readiness. So that's everything from the messaging and working with the branding company and developing the website, getting your social sites all set up, coordinating with all of your investors. This was all work that had to be done before we wanted to, launch publicly. And so, but backing up, setting those objectives, we really started with one main business objective, and that was to attract brand named dairy industry customers and partners. That kind of set the stage for setting our communications objectives, which were to, build awareness for the climate's methane problem, right? So really kind of focusing in on methane and why we need to pay more attention to methane specifically, kind of why it matters. And then obviously creating awareness for the new company and the new product that it's bringing to market in this methane to value solution. And we had this opportunity to really own this new category. And so that's where we kind of started with setting the objective. And I think that's the most important thing before you start really developing out your formal communications plan. For audiences, I think understanding like who you need to reach as you define your communications plan is an obvious next step. For us at Windfall, we really started with the potential customers as dairy farmers and large dairy brands as our primary audience. But we also knew that there was an opportunity to reach potential partners like Dairy Farmers of America. This is a seed funding, so future rounds of investment are going to be important at some point. Yeah. So reaching those VCs more broadly was important. And then this notion of a growing awareness around methane as a problem amongst general consumers and more general audience was kind of also a secondary audience for us. Key messages, I think, are important for any type of announcement. But for us here, for Windfall, we were dealing with developing messaging around defining the company and who the company is, what the solution is, how it works. Like those are all very primary. And then you had the very specific kind of news announcement messages, right? So the details around the funding and things like that and what we're going to be able to do. But key messages are kind of foundational for everything that we develop. So whether that's it supports your interviews, your key messages for interviews, it's your press release, it was the website content. This became kind of a grounding.
Social copy too.
Yeah, social copy, everything. So it's really the grounding for any announcement. That's not unique for for climate tech, obviously, this is just, core for a general PR. But getting that agreement and alignment can take some time. So building that into your kind of planning stages, making sure you've got alignment across all of your internal stakeholders and external stakeholders too. Like, for example, getting the investors on board with how the company was being described and things like that are important. And then media strategy, right? So this is an important part of the campaign, and we think about there's lots of different options for how you engage with the media. For Windfall, we really settled in on a goal of securing one really top tier national story that really gave us the opportunity to go really in depth with the story, as opposed to the other option would be to pitch very wide to multiple journalists and hope that we got the right interest, right? If we went with an exclusive strategy where we actually chose to pitch Kat Clifford at CNBC. And we chose her because not only is she like a really astute climate journalist, but she's really also she's interested in great founding stories. And Josh, the CEO of Windfall, had a really great background in, he's a biotech CEO. This is his third or fourth company, very successful exits, all in biotech. So we were able to really kind of dig deep into that story to help support the media strategy as well. So for us, it was much more important to get that one meaty story and then follow up with our other targets, which included, business press that covered funding rounds. We focused on the industry trades like agriculture and dairy, and obviously the outlets that focus more on like climate tech. But that was all done kind of day of and after following that exclusive story.
Yeah, and then the social media launch too, you're turning on those new social channels like we talked about, Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, using them to kind of amplify the news as well. As a company in stealth, those were things that needed to be built out. It's something to be considered as well. Those own channels is very important.
Timing for us really was predicated on the launch of the website. Like, we had to be ready. We had to have like a place to, like, we're going to attract attention. We needed to make sure that there was something to capture that attention. So the website became kind of the forcing function for our timeline. And then within that timeline, once we had kind of a go date for and readiness for the website, everything else kind of backed out of that. And so when we thought about our media strategy and our pitching strategy, we like to have a couple of weeks to really pitch a story, especially working with an exclusive. In this case, wanting to, be able to engage with a reporter, make sure you've got the right interest. Sometimes you get a pass and you need to go on to another reporter. So having a little bit of wiggle room in that strategy is important. And then, if the reporter needs to pitch their editor, they need time for interviews, all of that time for interviewing, developing the story, and lining up against the start date or the launch date that you've put in place takes a couple of weeks. And so we really recommend baking in that type of time to do that work. One thing I'll mention, a lot of times companies ask us to go out and pitch a story before a press release is ready. And I'd caution against that. Like, we really like to have a press release at least 90% like complete before we're like out there pitching with reporters, because we never want to be in a situation where you have to like ask for it back, or if the timing gets moved, or something significant changes in the press release. You never want to be in a position where you have to say, just kidding, can I have that back?
Right.
It doesn't go over very well. And finally, measuring success. We start with objectives, and I think that sets the stage for how you will measure your success. It's really important to agree on what those success metrics might look like upfront. And for us, as I mentioned, settling in on the most important goal for us from a media strategy anyway was to get that one really good feature story. And we felt that was the right thing for for Windfall, because it the exclusive and that particular outlet really helped us reach a wide swath and a large swath of the audiences that we were trying to reach. And it was actually, you know, based on the CNBC article, we were really able to achieve the goals the business goals that we set out, which were to attract those major brands. And they, you know, immediately got a handful of calls from the brands that they were looking to attract. And we actually considered whether or not we should use some of the tools that we have to boost the organic press coverage, to, you know, basically take the CNBC article and boost the visibility of that to attract even more more eyeballs on that. And we decided, based on the success of the business goals, the team was actually said, no, we're okay. We've got enough going on right now, so we'll hit pause. We'll pick it up on the, you know,
we can always return to that, right?
You can always return to it, but let's like slow the roll, because we've got a lot going on. It produced the results that we were hoping to produce. And just quickly, some of the results from that campaign. This is the story, Cap story in CNBC, that really that was really the main event for the launch. And then follow-on coverage, like I mentioned, we did the exclusive, and everything else was pitched after the fact. But you know, based on the coverage we got from CNBC, plus, you know, the business press that covered the funding news, we had some really great coverage coming out of climate-focused publications, and also the industry outlets that we were looking for. All of this resulted in, when we think about how else can we track the success of the program, we also look at other metrics like website traffic, right? So like, what was the actual impact of some of this coverage? And, you know, within the first week, there were more than 2,000 visitors. We just turned on like LinkedIn, and there were more than 400 now followers to that program in just
awesome.
in just a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
So a lot of really great traction in just a few weeks since launch.
It shows the value of having that strategic communications plan in place to really execute on those business goals.
So having funding or having a major launch gives you the opportunity to create a lot of awareness really fast and really effectively. But then what? Like, you've got this major announcement, and the attention on your company can really it can fall off a cliff if you're not kind of feeding the communications program, right? If you think about it as a one-time event, then things can get quiet very, very quickly. So one of the things that we think about is, how do you sustain that visibility after that major event? And what does that program look like?
Yeah, and a lot of these things, Melissa, they apply to businesses at all stages, right? Once they're kind of launched and they're out of stealth. So we'll dive into these a little bit more in depth through the next couple of slides, but we really think about these in three main buckets. It's news, and then thought leadership as well. So you're, you know, creating attention for the problem, you're educating, and doing some of that really important work. And then you're taking it on the road to those key conferences, so that you're either networking and, you know, in that one-to-one fashion, or you're on stage talking about these issues and these problems and what the solutions potentially might be. So when we think about building a news pipeline, a lot of this is creative work, right? Funding is a very natural moment where you want to put an announcement out there and announce this big milestone. But the rest of it might not seem as natural to announce. But these are really important moments. And whether it's hires, pilots, customers, partners, these are an opportunity to signal to the market that your company is continuing on its mission, it's continuing its momentum, and you're creating buzz. And we, as communications professionals, can take some of these moments to either forge new relationships with reporters that are going to be able to shine a light on these moments and on your company's general mission, or you're able to sustain the relationships that you've built around that funding news. So these are really critical opportunities. And so while they might seem small internally, being able to say, hey, we've just acquired this huge customer, you know, we've reached this milestone with this technology development, these are really, really important. And so building that news pipeline is really critical. So you are sustaining that momentum of that initial spotlight from the funding.
Yeah, I think this is even more important to climate tech startups than maybe your general, like any other like venture-backed startup. I mean, news is always good to have, but for companies that, it takes a long time to get to market. It could be a very long time for climate before, you've got your funding to the time you're actually launching in market and have revenue generation, right? So I think that is unique to a science-based business, right? You have to recognize that there's a lot of gap in between those moments in time. So being really creative in finding other ways to talk about the company and the traction that it's getting is really important. So you've got to be creative.
Yeah.
I think in particular, the technology milestones, any major breakthroughs that's happening on the development as you're going through this journey is really important.
A lot of this stuff's new, right? It's new technology created to solve this very specific problem. It's not always just software where you're announcing, a new version of some sort of app. This is all brand new, and it's going to be replacing infrastructure that we've relied on for, hundreds and hundreds of years. So it's really cool to be able to put that kind of a technology milestone out. I also think news is really important because of the factor that these newsrooms and the reporters that are covering this space, they're so swamped and they're really understaffed in these sections talking about the climate crisis. So news is really important because it signifies that, like, hey, you really do need to pay attention to our company.
Right. Credibility.
Yeah, there's less trend stories in this space. So having that pipeline of opportunities to do that is critical. And then here on the thought leadership front, we think about this as really, it's an opportunity to educate and to influence the market in between those news opportunities. So it's important to have those strong, unique perspectives to stand out from the crowd, to differentiate yourself from competitors. So here on the right, we have some examples from another one of our clients, Agilitas Energy, and some of the work that we've done for them. They are a renewables developer with solar projects throughout New England, as well as now they're expanding nationally. They have some in Texas as well. So really cool company working on developing the renewable energy and energy storage that we need for the energy transition. But one of the problems that they come up against a lot in their business is this interconnection queue. So I don't know if everyone's familiar, but a lot of times these renewable energy projects are built, they're, permitted and everything, but then there's this huge delay of sometimes, over a year where this project is ready to be turned on. It's ready to generate clean energy for everyone to use. And the utilities sometimes they sit in this queue of interconnection and they're not connected to the grid to be able to give that power.
It's like you've built this hotel, this gorgeous hotel, you're waiting to have visitors and guests in your hotel, and you just have to sit and wait, and you can't open your doors.
It's very frustrating for everyone in the industry. And so we took this opportunity to kind of build out the narrative around the interconnection queue, talk about how it's such an issue for and a hindrance to the energy transition more broadly. So kind of doing some of that education about the problem, and then, trying to influence the stakeholders that might be able to fix the issue and hopefully, remove a roadblock for one of our clients, and taking their perspective and downloading it and then putting it and packaging it up for the right audiences is a key part of that. Here, the Boston Business Journal obviously is a local publication, but talking about it for that audience, so you kind of create some consumer demand and awareness for the issue, and then talking directly to the folks in the solar industry by placing an article with PV Magazine. Both of these were penned by Agilitas Energy executives. And then to take it to the next level too, you're able to bring it on the road and, speak about it in front of those audiences. So, they were recently at the New York Energy Summit talking about this, hopefully creating some awareness and hopefully fixing the problem.
So finally, we want to talk a little bit about measuring success. I know that this is a big topic for for a CEO who is, working and willing to invest in PR. You want to know and understand, what kind of ROI you can expect for that type of investment. I would suggest that we focus on kind of the outcomes of your program versus the outputs. I think it's very easy to get trapped in the message of, like, how many articles did we secure? How many press releases have we put out? Those are, certainly you want to track those, but does that actually give you an idea of how meaningful the program is to your business, right? So how do you tie back your program and the results of your program back to your business goals. So that's really what we try to focus on is, but you have to understand, what do you have to actually measure? Like what's available to you? PR is really a top of the funnel marketing program, meaning, it's helping drive awareness and visibility. It's not typically associated with sales, or in a B2B environment, you might think about it as driving lead generation. It doesn't really do that. It helps support lead generation, but it's not that transactional. Or, unless you're a consumer, maybe if you're a consumer company and you're transacting online, there's a much more maybe direct correlation between PR and that actual transaction. But for most companies, you're looking at a long tail between PR and actual sales. Like we said, we talked about companies who aren't even in commercial arrangements yet. So sales is not really a good metric to be tying PR to anyway. So the types of things that are available to you, though, are, website traffic. You can look at, Google Analytics provides you a pretty detailed view of what's happening on your website. If you can overlay that traffic to some of the investments that you're making, whether that's a major news campaign, particular media coverage like that CNBC story, or a major event that you're investing in, if you can, overlay all of these things that you're investing in with the website traffic as a kind of a leading indicator of what that activity is doing for your general awareness and interest that's being driven to your company. We also look at share of voice. Share of voice is a way to measure a company against competitors. Usually, this is not like a short term. It's not. Share of voice isn't really valuable to look at in a week's time or a month's time, but over time, say quarterly, looking at share of voice quarterly and annually, kind of understanding where you are against your competitors is, especially in a targeted universe of publications, is a really effective tool that gives you kind of insight to what you could be doing better and how can you improve. We also look at things like audience reach. Is the type of coverage you're getting reaching the audiences that matter most to your business? You can get press coverage maybe anywhere, but is it actually tying back to your business goals? Is it reaching the right people? And then over time, not something I think most climate tech startups would be considering, but over time, as you've been investing in communications over the long run, and as you become commercialized and maybe investing more in PR and communications, things like brand reputation. Those require studies and they're often pretty expensive. So you don't typically kind of look at that type of measurement because it's outsized based on the investment you're probably typically making on a monthly or annual basis. But longer term, that's an option and a good way to measure impact of marketing and communications.
And before we move on, we want to leave you with some words of caution around communications as well.
We get really, really excited, but there are some hold on moments.
Exactly. So contrary to the common refrain, not all press is good press. Sometimes there are stories that maybe don't bring value to your business. Again, to go back to business goals and business value, which is so critical with communications. It's thinking about what stories do you actually want to be represented in and be a part of, and to lend your voice and expertise. An example that comes to mind recently is the Silicon Valley Bank collapse and that story that surrounded that moment in time. I think I saw a lot of companies and entrepreneurs and leaders jump at the chance to comment. It didn't seem like they thought about what if there was value in actually participating in that story. A lot of times, as an employee, you might see your executive out there talking about that story, and it doesn't really communicate, confidence in the business. You might not have diversified your assets and you're over leveraged at this one particular financial institution. Do you really want to be the person and the voice to be talking about that story? Especially as reporters, we're really eager to get their hands on what this meant for the climate community. Silicon Valley Bank had a reputation as being a climate bank, first and foremost. There was a lot of investment dollars there, whether or not that was VCs or they were the companies that they had invested in. And so, does it actually bring value to your business to be a part of that story? I don't know necessarily. I would have to talk to you about what those business goals are, but something to keep in mind as you're, going about your life as a communications professional and telling stories. Another thing too is over-promising and under-delivering. If you commit to a timeline for a new product, or you are talking about what might be happening on the technology front, I think if you ever communicate that to a reporter, or you're talking about that publicly in an announcement, you have to be prepared to be held accountable for that timeline, and whether or not you are able to meet it or not. So making sure that you are promising what you're able to actually deliver on, and if you don't meet that promise, being transparent and honest about what might have went wrong, that prohibited you from getting there. As far as competition goes, not to go back to another common refrain, but it's not always worth throwing that stone from inside your glass house. I tried to think of a climate analogy or a pun for this, but I don't think there's I don't think
Throwing it
glasses
from your greenhouse.
Yeah. So, yeah, but if you want to be talking about your competition, think about whether or not that's actually worth the squeeze. If, for example, if your company or your competitors have been experiencing some layoffs, have been kind of rampant in the market recently, you might not want to be talking about what this means and commenting from a position of strength, because you don't know what's going to happen next quarter. So making sure that you're able to stand on sure ground and not having anything come back to bite you down the road.
I feel like the climate tech industry is a little bit more of a community, and you don't see that happening as much as you might see it in like a B2B tech.
Everyone's working on the same problem, right?
Right. It feels a little bit more mission driven and is not as combative. Even, I see a lot of competitors even boosting each other up and celebrating success, which is the opposite, and which is really awesome to see. So I don't see this a lot, but it's definitely worth a caution.
Something to keep our eye on as the industry matures and continues to grow, I think, as this 2.0 wave continues. Protecting your IP, also really important. You definitely want to provide some background to reporters that are interested in learning about what your tech or your product does, but thinking about whether or not you're prepared to actually divulge all of that information, or if it's going to provide another competitive advantage to your competitors.
Yeah, it's really a balance between giving enough information to a journalist or an influencer to gain the credibility, right? Like you got to show enough to secure both the interest and the confidence that you know what you're actually talking about, and that you actually have something real, but then also balancing with how much do you want out in the public market and how much of your IP is protected.
Yeah, and I go back to thinking about a lot of these climate tech reporters, right? They have really technical backgrounds. Some of them are even, PhDs themselves.
And they ask really good questions.
And they're really curious. They get this stuff at a really intrinsic level. And so it's really important to know what you're talking about and, not bluffing your way through it. So being able to actually really talk about what you have and at confidence level too is important. And then, thinking about the value of bipartisanship. Recently, we talked about the IRA earlier. It's been great to see some of the infusion of capital, and a lot of that's been boosted by some really awesome policies that have come into, place recently. But, you never know what's going to happen during the midterms or at the end of the next presidential election cycle. Power can shift, and this isn't necessarily a blue state, red state problem as well. There's a lot of really great pilot facilities, factories, awesome work happening in a lot of red states. And so, making sure that you are, not throwing stones at the other side of the aisle is also important, no matter where you are.
Yeah, great. We are we're getting tight on time. Like, I want to make sure that we have time for questions. So we're going to do this a really quick round of a little bit of education around terminology. It's I think most people think they know the difference between a press release and PR. But there has been confusion, but also some more very specific terminology that journalists use that's really important that you execute, by the letter of the law, or you're going to, ruffle some feathers. So, for example, embargo versus exclusive. I think this is a really important one to get straight and really understand the mechanics behind these two.
Yeah, they're not the same, Melissa. So, embargo is the time that the news lifts or it goes live, right? So if a reporter has news under embargo, they've agreed to review that news. They have agreed not to break that news ahead of the time that the announcement will be going live. And that's a pretty important piece, right? Because reporters need time to write their story. They want time to interview, talk to executives. They want to talk to investors to build that out. And so building in that timeline, as we talked about earlier, is really important. And so that's the embargo period.
Right. So basically you might hear us use a term called embargo pitching, which means, a week or two before the announcement's going to go live, we're pitching that under embargo, meaning that these journalists have agreed to that embargo time, right?
Yeah.
Before we've shared that news.
And you certainly want to make sure they agree before you send it to them too, because,
Right.
you don't want to give them the news and then say, hey, that's under embargo. It doesn't work like that. They can take it and run with it from there.
Right. And an exclusive is when you've engaged with one reporter and really given them the opportunity to break the story or break the news directly. That's a really good, strong, handshake. Like, they've agreed to write the story. You've agreed to give them it literally as an exclusive, meaning you're not talking to any other journalists before then. I feel like that a lot of companies or executives that we work with want to be a little squishy around that. Well, yes, we got the exclusive, but can't we share it with, this other trade reporter? This is a business press reporter. Can we share it with the trade reporter? No. The answer is no. You've agreed to an exclusive. You've got to abide by that exclusive. And it's your relationships are really important to maintain. And once you've made that agreement, you stick to it. But it can be a really, really effective way to get that really good, strong story.
This is another really crucial one to get right on the record versus off the record. The way to think about on the record is it's actually kind of simple. It's anything, everything. No matter how offhand a remark is, if you're talking to a reporter, you're emailing with a reporter, you should consider that on the record. And it's something that they might use, run with, and put into a story. And then that goes into the public domain and it's associated with you or your business.
Right. Now, off the record is something also you need to negotiate with a reporter. A reporter doesn't necessarily have to engage with you off the record or on background. It's something you really want to make sure that you're asking about first. And you also have to have a really good reason for doing it. I think this is a tool or strategy that should be used selectively and strategically. You've got to have a reason for kind of going off record or off on background
Yeah.
It's just something you want to be really careful with.
Yeah. We often get asked, to place an article as an op-ed when maybe the content's not best suited for that. And I think we're really talking about thought leadership content here, not necessarily news or announcements. So just because you have an interesting point of view doesn't mean that it's necessarily fit to be published in the op-ed section of the Wall Street Journal, for example. We think about a blog post. It's the lowest barrier to entry to kind of share your perspective or thoughts on the market. And you can publish really whatever you want there.
And there's a lot of value in publishing a blog, right?
Yeah.
And there's SEO value, it supports visibility and making sure that so it's not that even though it's a low threshold, it doesn't mean there's no value.
Right. Absolutely.
And then a contributed article is typically when we're sharing thought leadership content with trade publications. Really great place to create visibility within the industry. A lot of trade publications accept contributed articles from executives who can offer expertise and thought leadership and value that is or that's valuable to their readership. A lot of trade publications don't have a lot of editorial support, and so they're looking for good quality content. It's definitely a higher threshold than publishing your own blog, and can be a really effective PR strategy. Whereas an op-ed, as you mentioned, it's a really hard bar to get into an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal or even your local, say here in Boston, the Boston Globe. An op-ed placement requires a couple of different things that a blog or contributed article don't require. One is it's got to be really timely. The newspapers are really looking for content that is very tied to major trends, things that are happening that they're already writing about in the paper, and it also has to be really strong, really unique, and you've got to pitch the story to an editor that's got to accept it. So you've got to be fast and you've got to be good. And you've got to think about the readership, so the relevancy of the content that you're pitching. An industry a point of view about a particular industry may have a lot of relevance to that trade publication, but not so much to your regional or national paper, because they're really looking at content that is very specific to their audience.
And it's not a hard and fast rule, but a general rule of thumb, right, is has the paper covered that story before from a news perspective? And then it's probably more appropriate for you to write that op-ed that flushes out an opinion that's a little bit more formed. And, Melissa kind of alluded to this earlier, but, public relations is not a press release. I think public relations really encompasses everything that we talked about through the whole presentation today, talking about strategic communications and thinking about that more holistically in the way that it supports business goals.
Right. I think there's also a little bit of confusion about what a press release is. Like a really good, effective press release is a news announcement, and it's a means to communicate with journalists. I think we often use the press release as a way to communicate lots of information. Sometimes it's actually newsworthy, other times it's not. It's worth posting on your website, but there's lots of there's varying levels of value to a press release, and they are not all newsworthy, but it is also not PR. All right, a final word, because we are closing and we probably have a couple of minutes for questions, but we wanted to offer one last thing of value.
Yeah, so we want to, encourage you all to start here. Even if you're not ready to invest in communications at this point, we think of these reporters as the folks that you definitely want to be reading and you definitely want to be following along with on social media. So, these are the kings and queens makers of, climate tech. And I think they're real tastemakers. They are really, really smart the way that they cover the market. They're thinking about broad trends. They're thinking about emerging technology. They're thinking about investments, the potential for capital, and the way that the different economic triggers are going to be influencing the space,
including policy.
This really runs the gamut for this group of reporters. So
now, Liam, you have shared here Twitter handles for all of these folks, and I feel like it's a mixed bag when I talk to a CEO of a climate tech startup, whether they are on Twitter or not on Twitter. Should they be on social media?
Yeah, I definitely would encourage them to. I think there's an energy Twitter community that under that hashtag energy Twitter, but there's a real community of folks sharing ideas. They're encouraging, they're following along, and have heard from a number of CEOs that that's where they've actually found some partnerships. They've found folks that they've been able to, collaborate with, commiserate with, and it's a good opportunity to build a community, as well as like hearing and seeing firsthand what these reporters are writing about, what they're interested in, what they're tweeting about.
That's an interesting point. These the reporters that we work with are active on Twitter.
Mm-hmm.
They are engaging with sources. They're talking amongst each other, which is another interesting kind of community. They follow each other. They read each other. They engage. So it's a really great place to listen and learn before you're actually out there trying to pitch. I think it's really important that you're actually listening and reading what these folks are putting out.
Yeah, and I think it's a good way to actually have your finger on the pulse of like what's really important here too in the climate tech space, because I think about, for example, AI reporters, they're not necessarily sharing or retweeting each other's stories on Twitter or on social media more broadly. But I do think these folks, they're genuinely invested in what the scoops are that other people have, the trend stories, and they'll share them out, which I think goes to show like, all right, if this person, like say Akshat, had retweeted one of Jeff's stories, I'm like, oh, Jeff really is onto something with this. And it gives you a chance to really learn and be a sponge.
Yeah. All right. Well, that brings us to the end of our prepared commentary.
Yeah.
But we would love to answer any questions that might have arisen.
Yeah, so feel free to go ahead and drop them in the chat, and we'll go ahead and answer them.
We're sitting here in silence.
Yeah.
Come on, somebody's got to give us a question. All right. Can you read this better?
So this attendee says, can a reporter agree to have a conversation off the record, but then publish what you talked about anyway? Are they allowed to do that? It's a good question. Melissa, you want to take this one?
Yeah, I think most reputable journalists that we work with would abide by what they've agreed to. I've never come up in an example with any of the reporters that you've listed that would ever not abide by whatever agreement that you've made. But I think that where there are sometimes challenges is when a spokesperson hasn't been clear. I think you have to be really very specific about when you are on and off the record. So for example, you might say, hey, can we go off the record for a moment? And then we're talking, and then maybe the conversation shifts. And are you still on the record or are you off the record? So you want to make sure that there's absolute clarity about what information is being shared on the record versus off the record.
I think it's important to, like, the reporter has to grant you that you're off the record. It's not just automatically granted because you've said that you're off the record. The reporter is the holder of the record, if you will. So you want to make sure that the reporter says, yes, this can be off the record. Once they've agreed to that, I think most reporters, will abide by their word. I've certainly never been burned by this before. And I think, if a reporter has done that, they don't want to burn that relationship.
Mm-hmm. Oh, Karen's got a question.
Yeah, the one slide referenced protecting IP. The question is whether or not, if you use AI tools such as GPT-4 in your communications activities, if yes, do you use AI to craft messages, press releases for research or other purposes? Thanks, Karen.
Yeah, we do not use any of the AI kind of tools that have launched recently to develop content that we would be sharing. Certainly, like everyone else, we're exploring the capabilities of these tools. I think one of the tools that we use, Muckrack, launched an AI feature within the I was a little confused by it, honestly, because it's an AI tool that could write a press release, which I found off-putting a little bit, because if you're going to write a press release, you need to have actually details and background, and these AI generative tools are pulling information off of websites, right? Information that's already, or content that's on the internet that's already known. So how could you draft a press release based on that type of content? It was very confusing, but I love the idea of being able to use it for brainstorming, to think about, to ask questions and get different ideas about how you might approach a particular problem. But I can't see us literally using content that is generating by like ChatGPT to work with especially with the caliber of reporters that we work with. I think it's a very fine line to walk, because I think it can highlight some of the I would say bad apples in PR, right? We've got to earn our reputation as
it's a relationship business.
Business consultants and communicators. Using AI to generate like content for us seems to be kind of off the mark or off brand.
Kate's got a question about current news, how to jump on it and like with rapid response to have clients comment on news. Thanks, Kate.
Yeah, we do this all the time.
Yeah. I think it's something we've seen be successful, especially around policy updates and talking about what the IRA might mean for the market. When that was initially released, I think we were successfully able to put some CEOs on the record with some reporters to talk about what it might mean for their business, what they were concerned about, how it's actually going to be rolled out in practice. Because, if you remember when the IRA was announced, it was talked about as all of these giant packages going to bigger problems, but not necessarily what the application process would be for these grants and these funds. And I think some of that's still being ironed out today. But, being able to put a climate tech CEO in front of a reporter to talk about that is, one of the best ways to do it. And I think definitely something we recommend and work with on our clients.
And the way we do that, we're obviously monitoring on a daily basis the news that is happening, so that we can engage our clients pretty quickly when there is an opportunity, because timeliness is what makes or breaks a rapid response.
Yeah.
That's why it's called rapid.
Yeah, and having the executive support to be able to participate in these programs is so critical, right? Like you might be able to flag something or see a story break and anticipate that cycle, but unless the executive with that perspective that you do need is able to give you a couple of nuggets to dangle in front of the reporter, get their attention, and provide some emphasis on what the value of talking to this person as opposed to the hundreds of other executives in their inbox would be, I think is really important. And so getting that unique perspective from the business side of things too is important with those kind of issues response and rapid response campaigns.
We have another question about should the spokesperson for a climate tech company always be the CEO? No. Well, in climate tech, in startups, you often have the founders or the CEOs are often also the technology experts, right? Because they have developed the solution. So oftentimes the CEO or this usually multiple co-founders, and they can play different roles. And I think agreeing to like how you use the CEO versus another co-founder or maybe a senior technologist, just being very clear on which opportunities you'll use each spokesperson with. We kind of create a matrix of, who's the best spokesperson for which topic. In some cases, especially climate tech companies who have heads of policy, they can also be really effective spokespeople when the topic is policy and government. So that's also helpful.
It's really the person that's the closest to the thing that they want to talk about and making sure that that person is senior enough too. But definitely going across the entire executive suite is something that, it depends on the company. It depends on the person, whether or not they're media trained. But of course, definitely want to make sure that you leverage the best source possible for the story.
Oh, one more question. Do you have industry analysts that you also pitch?
Yeah, so I'll jump in here. We do manage it for a couple of clients in the climate tech space, specifically more around energy and utilities. But yes, that's definitely analyst relations is certainly a part of the program. It might not necessarily make sense for some of the early stage companies that we were kind of talking about with the launch and coming out of stealth mode that we did today. But it's definitely an emerging space. And I think, again, as the media follows the money, but so does the analyst space, right? So we're going to be seeing a lot more of this in the future, and being able to support that for clients is critical.
Yeah, I think one really good place that climate tech startups can focus on if there was one kind of analyst group to focus on would be like Bloomberg NEF. It's also tied to the Bloomberg as the media outlet, but also a lot of good kind of analysts in that space that are very influential.
Yeah, the other one's probably Wood Mackenzie as well. They're kind of more on the energy markets and electricity markets side of things, but both of those are pretty good firms that are able to kind of provide that third party expertise and validation for clients. Thanks, Kate. I know we're coming up on time here, but please, thanks so much for your time today. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to, reach out. We'd be happy to kind of, talk to you more and provide guidance and support.
Yeah, find us on LinkedIn or our email addresses, mmahoney@v2comms.com
and L Sullivan at v2comms.com. Just the first letter of our first names and our last names.
Right. Yeah, would love to hear from you and answer any other questions that you might have.
Thanks so much, everyone, and have a great day.
Thank you.